Hi, welcome to Storytime with Angel, and welcome back to our special series of Gothica readings. I'm hoping that the lawnmowers that are going in the neighborhood won't be too audible, but we're going to give this a try. As we talked about on Tuesday, this is the third Gothica anthology that we're going to be reading from. The first anthology, these are all from Dreamspinner Press, was Stitch, which was about artificially created men. The second was Bones, which is a voodoo anthology, and this third one is called Claw. So this is the third Gothica anthology. It's called Claw, and it's traditional werewolf style stories. These are not your pack shifter story. There's no alphas and omegas here. There's no fated mates. There's nothing of that sort. These are old style, old school werewolf type stories. Think Lon Chaney, think older, more gothic stories. And this is the kind of thing that I would like to see more of again. These older style gothic horror kinds of paranormal things. It's really what I grew up on, and I love that stuff. But enough about me. Anyway, this is then from our third Gothic anthology. It's called Claw. We read from Jamie Fessenden's story Isolation on Tuesday. Today we're going to read from Kim Fielding's story, which is called Transformation. So there's 3 stories in this anthology. Jamie's, Kim's, and then Eli Easton also wrote one called The Black Dog, which is a really cool story. But I love them all. This one today is Transformation by Kim Fielding, and it is actually a historical, which is a lot of fun. So the blurb for this story says, after being caught in bed with another male student in 1886, Oris Spencer is declared an abomination by his wealthy father. Oris is promptly banished from their Fifth Avenue mansion and sent across the continent to Oregon. Now Oris must try to find a place for himself on his brother's farm and figure out how to deal with life as a pioneer. When he's called on to help protect the livestock from a predator, he's not at all certain he's up to the task. Then he meets Henry Bond, a strange and intriguing man who lives in a cabin in the hills. Oris's attraction to Henry may not be an abomination, but it may prove a greater danger than banishment. Dun dun dun. All right. So here we are. Kim Fielding's Transformation from the third Gothica anthology from Dreamspinner. Claw. New York was never truly dark. No matter how late the hour, there were always streetlight flames flickering inside their glass prisons. Occasional windows in the residential areas would be alight with candles or lanterns or gas lights. And in the rougher bits of town, taverns spilled out a brassy light from windows and open doors, creating sharp shadows in the alleyways. Oregon, however, was a different story. Although the moon was full tonight, the clouds were much too thick for anything but the faintest smudge of moonlight to shine through. The darkness seemed to swallow all the sounds around him. He felt ridiculous, marching up and down the sheep paddock with a lantern in his hand and the shotgun under his arm, but at least it wasn't raining. And Lucy had even made him a pot of strong coffee and given him a small smile before he walked out the door. "I'll keep some soup on the stove," she'd said. "Come in for a few minutes if you need to warm up." She was no doubt pleased to have her husband beside her in bed tonight, and Oris was proud to have found another way he could help out a little. With the mud squelching at his feet and the sheep breathing peacefully nearby, he could almost imagine himself the only human on the planet. Disturbing as that thought was, it was better than the alternative, which was wondering what Daniel was doing at that very moment. It would already be the next morning in Europe. Perhaps he was waking up in a Parisian garret, yawning as he made plans to visit a cafe for crusty bread with butter and jam. Perhaps someone was waking up with him, a pretty French boy with a charming accent and fashionable clothing that didn't smell like dirt and onions and sheep. Or perhaps something made a faint noise up ahead. On the small rutted pathway that led to the onion field and then to the tree-covered slopes beyond. It was an animal sound, a sort of muffled "oof" that sounded somehow deliberate. It reminded him of the satisfied little chuckle his father emitted whenever he felt he'd gotten the upper hand in a business dealing. "Who's there?" Oris called, feeling more ridiculous than ever. At least his voice didn't quaver. He was answered by another bestial laugh, this one possibly closer. He stooped and carefully set the lantern on the ground. The light was steadier that way, but it mostly illuminated the area around his feet, which wasn't helpful. He drew the shotgun from under his arm and held it against his chest. He stood there, silent except for his harsh breathing and pounding heart. For what seemed a long time, nothing happened. He'd been accused of having an overactive imagination, and he was almost ready to believe he'd hallucinated the noises. But just as he was about to pick up the lantern, the animal chuffed at him again. There was no question that it was closer this time, very close. In fact, if he lifted the lantern high and squinted, he might be able to see what was there. He had no desire whatsoever to do so. "It's nothing," he muttered. He'd seen enormous rats in New York, and probably this was something no more terrifying than that. He had no notion of what sorts of creatures roamed this area at night, though. Coyotes, yes, but Samuel said they wouldn't be dangerous to a grown man. Bears? Were there bears? "Go away!" Oris said, but didn't quite shout it. The creature answered him with another amused sound. Perhaps he ought to fire the gun, but that would wake the entire household, and Oris didn't want to face Samuel and Lucy's scorn if he was panicking over nothing. Instead of being merely useless, he'd graduate to full-fledged nuisance. In the darkness ahead of him, a footstep rustled on leaves. Oris realized he'd backed up against the fence and was in imminent danger of kicking over the lantern. His hands ached from clenching the gun. Deliberately deepening his voice, he called out again, "Go away! Leave! You don't belong here!" The creature growled. It was a low sound. Oris could almost feel the vibration through his feet, and it ignited every one of his atavistic reflexes. His lips pulled back from his clenched teeth, his spine tingled as the hair on his neck tried to rise, and his bowels felt watery and loose. He imagined the sharp stare of the unseen animal and pictured bloody fangs and tearing claws. Never mind Samuel and Lucy's potential contempt. He was going to fire the gun. He willed his hands to unclench, and he brought the stock to his shoulder, but now his hands shook, his entire body shook, and his grip fumbled. He dropped the weapon, and it landed at his feet with a soft thud. Not knowing whether to curse or pray, Oris bent to pick up the gun. He was still stooped and reaching when he saw the creature's eyes. They were close and glinted green in the lantern light. Oris's legs gave out, and he sank to his knees. He stopped his desperate scrabbling for the gun and simply froze. Even his lungs stopped working. The animal stepped closer, very slowly. Not as if it were frightened, but rather as if it enjoyed stalking him, the way Cook's cat liked to play with mice in the pantry. Soon it was near enough that Oris could make out the dim outline of its body. It looked like a large dog, heavy with a thick ruff of fur at its neck. In one large leap it could be on him. But it didn't leap, at least not yet. It stared at him, and Oris stared back, and although he could sense little else in the animal, its eyes gave the impression of keen intelligence. "Imagine when Daniel hears I've been eaten by a wild beast," Oris whispered. "Won't he be jealous? This beats a whole slew of handsome French garret mates." The animal, was it a coyote? Cocked its head slightly, which brought a burst of hysterical laughter from Oris. "Are you having second thoughts? Maybe a sorry thing like me would give you indigestion. I suppose you'd rather have a nice supper of tender lamb." It came a step closer. Oris smelled it, wet fur, pine sap, and something else he couldn't name, the scent of the wilderness, perhaps. And then a strange thing happened. Well, stranger. While Oris's heart still raced, he realized that the terror had fled, and what he was feeling now was excitement. He was nearly giddy with it, actually, like the first time Daniel had interrupted their studies with a kiss and then dragged Oris willingly to his bedroom. Why would a man feel excited when he was about to be killed? Oris had no real answer for that. Maybe the animal could hypnotize its prey with its gaze, or maybe Oris had simply lost his sanity. In any case, he took a deep breath and tilted his head to the side. "All right, then," he said. The animal's muscles bunched, but just before it leaped, a strident bark burst from the darkness behind it. Oris startled, and the animal yelped with surprise before whirling around. Good Lord, there were 2 of them! The new one was snarling, but as it moved closer to the lantern, its attention seemed focused less on Oris than on the first beast. The new one growled, and the first one yipped slightly before hunching its shoulders and dropping its gaze. Without another glance at Oris, the first animal trotted away. But the other one, the new one, it did not leave yet. It looked at Oris, but without menace, and there was something so compelling about it that Oris had to stop himself from crawling forward to meet it. "You're beautiful," Oris rasped. He couldn't see enough detail to support such an assertion, but there was something about those glowing eyes, the confident set of the large body, that suggested power and majesty even. The animal blinked at him. It stretched its head forward, and Oris thought it would close the space between them, but then it snarled, fast and sharp, before spinning around and bounding away into the blackness. Shivers. All right. So that's our excerpt today from Transformation by Kim Fielding. This is from the Claw anthology, which is the 3rd Gothica anthology from Dream Spinner Press. As usual, we'll have the cover and all of the pertinent buy link information down below on the blog. We will see you next week for another episode of Storytime. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening.